Jamal Rivers signed the marriage contract to save his daughter. He believed the money would keep her. He was wrong about everything. The billionaire had not chosen him for his clean record. The billionaire had chosen him because a clean record made the perfect man to blame for a death already scheduled. 90 seconds after the courthouse doors closed behind them, the gunfire began. The scarred woman beside him was never meant to survive her own wedding, and neither, it turned out, was he. The wedding was the trap. The garage on the east side of Detroit smelled of motor oil and cold coffee, and Jamal Rivers had learned to love both. He worked with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, his hands moving over an engine block the way a doctor's move over a patient he already trusts himself to save. Outside, a March wind pushed grit against the bay doors. Inside, a small radio on the workbench murmured the morning news, and a 5-year-old girl named Zoe sat on an overturned crate, swinging her legs, coloring a picture of a house that did not look like any house they had ever lived in. "Daddy, is this too much yellow?" "There's no such thing as too much yellow," he said. And she believed him because she believed everything he told her, and that was the whole terrible weight of his life. She believed him when he said they would be fine. She believed him when he said the letters from the lawyer did not matter. He kept his voice steady for her the way other men kept a gun in the house as a thing you hoped never to need but could not live without. The letters did matter. Her mother had walked out when Zoe was 2 and come back 3 years later with a new husband, a new address in a better suburb, and an attorney who used words like stable environment and demonstrated capacity to provide. Jamal provided. He provided by working 12-hour days and skipping his own meals, and none of it appeared in the columns of a financial disclosure form. On paper, he was a poor man in a poor part of a poor city, and paper was what judges read. The radio shifted to a business segment. A smooth voice mentioned the Holt Group, a private conglomerate preparing to close what analysts were calling the largest acquisition of the year. And then it mentioned a second name almost in passing, the way a knife is mentioned before anyone knows it will be used. Victor Kane, Chief Operating Officer, the man the article called Peter Holt's closest lieutenant, positioned to inherit operational control should the Holt family structure ever change. Jamal did not look up. The name meant nothing to him yet. It slid past like weather. He wiped his hands and told Zoe it was almost lunch. He did not hear the second car until it was already in the lot. It was a black limousine, long and clean, in a way nothing on that block was clean, and it sat idling like an animal that had wandered far from its own territory and did not care. A driver came around and opened the rear door, and the man who stepped out wore a gray overcoat that probably cost more than the building. He was somewhere past 60 silver at the temples, with a face that had learned long ago to give nothing away for free. "I'm told you're the best diagnostic man in the city," the older man said by way of hello. "I'm told you can hear what's wrong with an engine before you open the hood." "I can hear that yours is running fine," Jamal said. "So I'm guessing you didn't drive down here for a tune-up?" Something that was not quite a smile moved across the older man's mouth. "My name is Peter Holt. I'd like 10 minutes of your time. I'll pay you for an hour of it regardless of what you decide." Jamal glanced at Zoe, who had stopped coloring and was watching the stranger with the frank, unafraid curiosity of a child who had not yet learned which men to fear. He crouched, told her to go wash up in the back and count to 100 slow, and she went trailing her fingers along the tool bench, the way she always did. What Peter Holt offered him, standing there in a garage that reeked of solvent, was so strange that Jamal made him say it twice. A marriage. A contract marriage, 1 year in length, to Holt's daughter. Her name was Margaret. In exchange, a sum of money large enough that Jamal's throat went dry when he heard it, large enough to hire the kind of attorney who won large enough to move Zoe into the kind of home the lawyers kept describing, large enough that no judge in the state would ever again call him unfit. "You don't know me?" Jamal said. "You walked in off the street 20 minutes ago. I know exactly what I need to know." Holt's eyes did not waver. You have no criminal history, no debts that anyone could call leverage, no enemies, no scandals, nothing that would survive being turned over. You are, if you'll forgive the phrase, a clean man. That is a rarer thing than you would imagine, and it is precisely what I require." At the time, Jamal heard it as a compliment. Later, much later, in the dark of a house that did not belong to him, he would understand that Peter Holt had not been describing a virtue. He had been describing a use. A clean man makes the perfect suspect because the story writes itself a poor husband, a rich bride, a marriage of convenience gone wrong. Nothing about that story needs proof. It only needs a jury that already believes it. But that was later. There was a reason Holt needed a stranger, and Jamal did not learn the shape of it until it was too late to matter. The Holt fortune was not simply Peter's to move as he pleased. Margaret's mother had been an attorney, a careful one, and before she died, she had built a trust around her only child, like a wall around a garden. The terms named Margaret as the untouchable heir. The wall had exactly one gate. The trust could shift control only if Margaret married, at which point a portion of authority passed to her spouse, and in the passing opened a seam in the document that a determined man might work his fingers into and tear. Peter Holt was a determined man. He needed the gate opened. He needed it opened by someone disposable. Jamal, of course, understood none of this in the garage. He understood only the number and the letters from the lawyer and Zoe's voice counting somewhere in the back already up to 40. "Why would any woman agree to this?" he asked. "My daughter Holt said," and for the first time something flickered behind the practiced calm gone too fast to name, "has her own reasons. She is not an easy person to look at. There was a fire when she was a child. She keeps to herself. This arrangement suits her as well as it suits you." He drew a folded document from inside the gray coat. "The terms are strict. There are confidentiality clauses. You would not discuss the nature of the marriage with anyone ever. In return, your daughter's future is guaranteed. I don't imagine a man in your position gets many guarantees." He did not. That was the whole of it. That was the hook set clean through the meat. Jamal took the papers home that night and read them at the kitchen table long after Zoe had fallen asleep in the next room. He read them the way he read an engine listening for the wrong sound under the right one. He could not find it. The language was cold and total, and it promised him everything he needed and asked for nothing he thought he had. He told himself a man does not get to keep his pride and his child both not from where he was standing. He told himself he was choosing her. He signed on a Thursday. The wedding, if it could be called that, took place 3 days later in a county courthouse with fluorescent lights and a floor worn pale down the center by decades of shuffling feet. There was no music. There were 2 witnesses Jamal had never met and would never see again. And there was Margaret. She came in on her father's arm, wearing a long coat and a veil of dark fabric that fell from a wide-brimmed hat, so that her face was a shape behind gauze rather than a face. She did not speak when she entered. When the clerk asked her to state her name, she said it low. 2 syllables, Margaret Holt, and the voice underneath was younger than Jamal had expected and far more tired. When she was told to take his hand, she did, and he felt through the thin glove that her fingers were cold, and that they did not tremble so much as brace the way a person braces who has been touched carelessly too many times, and no longer expects gentleness from a stranger's grip. He looked at her, then at the veil and the coat and the careful distance she kept, even while standing close enough to marry, and something in him that had spent 5 years learning to protect a small person recognized something. He could not have said what. It was only an instinct, the same one that made him step between Zoe and the world without deciding to. It surfaced for half a breath, and then the clerk was talking again, and the moment closed over it. They signed the register. Her signature was small and precise. His was larger, steadier than his hands felt. And as they turned to leave, as the clerk gathered the papers and the witnesses drifted toward the door, Jamal caught sight of a man standing at the far end of the corridor, just past the reach of the overhead lights. He was younger than Holt, broad through the shoulders, dressed with the same expensive quiet, and he was speaking into a phone he held low against his jaw. He was looking directly at them. As Jamal watched, the man gave a single small nod to whatever the phone had said, and turned and was gone through a side door before Jamal could decide whether he had imagined the whole thing. He did not know the man's name. He had heard it once that morning on a radio and had not been listening. He would not put the face and the name together until people he trusted were already dead. Margaret said nothing on the courthouse steps. The March light was flat and gray, and she stood beside him now as his wife, a woman whose face he had not yet seen married to, save a child who was not hers, tied to a man she had met that morning, both of them believing they had made a bargain. Both of them believing the worst was behind them. The trap had already closed. Only the two people standing inside it did not yet know. There is a thing worth saying about the instinct that makes a person a parent, and it has nothing to do with money. It cannot be bought and it cannot be faked, and it does not measure itself in the columns of any disclosure form. It is the willingness to set down your own pride for the smallest, most fragile thing in your life and carry the weight instead. Jamal Rivers had that. He would need all of it. Because some doors do not open to let us out. Some doors open only to close behind us, and the kindest thing a man can do when a stranger offers him exactly what he is desperate for is to ask himself why he was the one chosen to receive it. Jamal had not asked, and the black car was already waiting at the curb. The car pulled away from the courthouse and turned east, and for the first 90 seconds, nothing happened at all. Margaret sat against the far door with her veiled face turned to the window. Jamal watched the gray city slide past and tried to think of something to say to a woman he had married an hour ago and could not see. He was still trying when the windshield came apart. It happened without preamble, the way real violence always does. A dark sedan slid up on the driver's side, and there was a sound like someone tearing a phone book in half very fast, and the glass in front went from clear to a spider's web of white, and the driver made a noise Jamal would hear in his sleep for a long time afterward. Instinct moved him before thought could. He came off the seat and folded himself over Margaret, one arm across her shoulders and the other bracing the door, pressing her down into the footwell with his whole weight, and the world above them filled with the flat, hard cracking of gunfire and the shriek of tires finding no grip. He had grown up where guns were a season, not an event. His body knew what to do even when his mind was still catching up. Keep low, keep her lower count, the shots, wait for the gap. And in the middle of it, in the part of him that never stopped noticing things, he registered something wrong about the way it was unfolding. The shooters had the angle. They had the moment. And yet, when he threw himself over Margaret and the car swerved and the driver, bleeding, wrenched them down a side street, the sedan did not press the kill. The way men press a kill, they mean to finish. It hesitated. It fell back, as though whoever was inside had been given one kind of instruction and was now watching a different kind of thing happen and did not know what to do about it. The driver got them 4 blocks before he slumped. Jamal climbed over the seat, took the wheel from the man's slick hands, and drove with Margaret's directions, coming thin and shaking from the back, out of the city north, until the buildings thinned to trees, and the trees thinned to a long private road, and the road ended at a house. It was an old estate stone and dark wood set alone at the end of its own long silence. A caretaker's place, Margaret said that her mother had kept and her father had forgotten. No staff, no cameras that reported anywhere. They half carried the driver inside and laid him on a couch, and Jamal did what he could with a first aid kit and a steady hand, and by some grace the wound was through the meat of the shoulder and not the man. By nightfall, the driver was breathing easy and sleeping, and Jamal and Margaret were alone in a house that belonged to a dead woman, married strangers hunted, and neither of them yet understood by whom. She had taken off the hat and veil to help with the bandaging because there was no one left to hide from, and a wounded man needed both her hands. Jamal had seen the scars then in the low light of a single lamp, and he had not flinched, and he had watched her watch him not flinch. The fire had taken the left side of her face from cheekbone to jaw and run down her neck and along her forearm, old scars silvered and smooth in places and drawn tight in others. She was perhaps 30. Under the ruin, the rest of her face was unremarkable and human and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the long day. "You didn't look away," she said. It was not gratitude. It was more like a scientist noting a result that broke the pattern. "Should I have?" "Everyone does." He cleaned the blood from his hands at the kitchen sink and did not answer that, because there was no answer that would not sound like a thing she had heard before, and stopped believing. It came out slowly over the next 2 days in pieces, the way trust always assembles itself out of small things before it risks the large ones. The fire that scarred her had not been an accident. She had been 9 years old. It had started in the night in the wing of the house where her mother kept her office, and her mother, the careful attorney, had not come out of it. Margaret had. She had been carried out by a groundskeeper and had spent the years since being told gently and often that it had been a faulty wire, an old building, a tragedy. She had never fully believed it. A child knows the difference between an accident and a thing that was done even when the child cannot say how she knows. "I have been afraid for 21 years, she said on the second night, sitting on the floor of the front room with her back against the couch where the driver slept. "And I have never once been able to point at what I was afraid of." Do you know what that does to a person? You start to think you invented it. You start to think you are simply broken and calling it danger. Jamal sat across from her with the small radio from the kitchen in his lap, its casing open, its guts spread on a dish towel. He had found it on a shelf dead, and he had started fixing it without deciding to the way his hands filled silence. "You weren't broken," he said. "You were right. That's worse. But you were right." She looked at him across the spread-out radio, and something in her face loosened a fraction. The first thing he had seen move in it that was not guarded. The full shape of it revealed itself the next morning, and it was Jamal turning a thing over in his mind, the way he turned over a stubborn engine who found the wrong sound under the right one. "Your father told me he needed a clean man," he said. They were in the kitchen. Weak light came through old glass. "No record, no debts, nothing that would survive being turned over. He said it like it was a compliment." It wasn't. "No. I've had 2 days to think about it, and it wasn't." He set down the coffee. Neither of them was really drinking. "A man like your father doesn't marry his daughter to a mechanic he met on a Tuesday because he admires my honest face. He needed the marriage, not me. The marriage itself. Something about you being married changes something for him." The color went out of what remained of Margaret's face. "The trust," she said quietly. "My mother's trust." And there it was, the seam in the document spoken aloud at last. Her mother had built the trust to make Margaret untouchable, the sole heir protected by walls of law that Peter Holt could not climb. But every wall her mother built had needed one door, and the door was marriage. On the day Margaret took a husband, a portion of the trust's control passed to her spouse, and in that transfer, the airtight thing developed a seam, a place where a determined man could work his fingers in and tear the whole document open. Peter had not needed a son-in-law, he had needed a key, and a key, once it has turned the lock, is only a small piece of metal that no one minds throwing away. "He was never protecting me," Margaret said. She said it slowly, as though setting down something heavy she had carried so long she had forgotten it was heavy. "The wedding wasn't a gift. It was a doorway he needed me to walk through so he could reach the thing on the other side. And once I'd walked through it, he didn't need you anymore." Jamal finished it because she could not. "The ambush wasn't random. It was the plan. You and me both on the courthouse steps, husband and wife dead in a robbery gone wrong. The poor husband, the rich bride, a marriage nobody understood and no one left alive to explain it." He heard his own voice go flat and hard. "That's why he wanted a clean man, Margaret. Not so I'd protect you. So I'd take the blame. If the killing got messy and the questions started, there's a poor black man who married a Holt heiress for money 3 days before she died. I write my own guilt just by existing. No jury needs proof of that. They've got the proof they want the second they see my face next to yours." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, wind moved the bare trees. Here was the thing that struck him hardest, standing in a dead woman's kitchen, with the truth finally laid bare between them. On one side of the country, there was a poor father who had sold his own freedom, signed away a year of his life, put his pride on a courthouse floor, and walked over it all to keep one small girl who was not going to inherit anything but his love. And on the other side, there was a rich father who had looked at his own daughter, his blood a woman whose only crime was that a wall had been built to protect her, and had decided she was a door to be walked through and then discarded, and had sent men with guns to make the discarding permanent. Money had bought Peter Holt everything a man could point at. It had bought him the estate and the acquisition and the lieutenant and the lawyers. It had not bought him the one thing the mechanic in the oil-stained shirt already had for free and would have died in the street to keep. Wealth can purchase safety for a little while. It has never once been able to purchase the warmth of a father's hand, and the men who forget that always learn it too late and always at someone else's cost. I gave my daughter to her grandmother 2 nights ago. Jamal said more to himself than to her. He had done it from a payphone on the drive out, made the call before he understood everything, but knowing enough. Zoe was safe 3 states from any of this, with the one relative Jamal trusted and no connection to the Holt name at all. It was the only clean thing in the whole mess. She's safe, which means the only thing your father can take from me now is the rest of my life. And I find I'm not in a giving mood. Something crossed Margaret's ruined face that he had not seen there before. Not hope, exactly. The memory of what hope had felt like. They could not stay. They both knew it. The estate had bought them 3 days of quiet, but a house her father had forgotten was still a house her father had once owned, and forgetting is not the same as never knowing. On the 4th morning, the driver was well enough to travel, and Jamal put him on a bus to a cousin in Ohio with cash from his own thin wallet and a promise that the man had seen nothing, which the man was only too glad to accept. Then Jamal turned to the harder problem, which was where 2 hunted people go, and one of them is the most recognizable heiress in the state, and the other is a mechanic whose face is already being fitted for a crime. He had one card, not a good one, but one. Malik had grown up 2 streets over from Jamal, and there had been years when they were closer than brothers, and years when they were nothing at all, and lately they had drifted into the loose occasional friendship of men who share a past and little else. Malik ran a body shop, and some things around the edges of the body shop that Jamal did not ask about. But Malik had a place above the shop where a person could disappear for a few days, and Malik owed him, and Jamal was out of better ideas. They drove south in the dead driver's car with the windows down so the broken windshield would not draw a second look, and Jamal watched the mirror the whole way. Above the body shop, in 2 rooms that smelled of exhaust and old cigarettes, Margaret spoke a name Jamal had not heard before. "There was a woman who worked for my mother," she said. "Her legal assistant, Lena Marsh. I was small, but I remember her. She used to bring me licorice when she came to the house with papers. After the fire, she came to the funeral and she held my hand and she said something I didn't understand then. She said, 'If you ever need to know what your mother really built, you find me.' I never did. I was 9, and then I was afraid, and the years went by." Margaret turned the water glass in her hands. "But if anyone kept a copy of the original trust, the real one, before whatever my father's lawyers did to it, it would be her. It was a thread, and they were people with nothing left but threads, so they pulled it. Malik, for a price he made sound like a favor, made some calls to people who found people. And Margaret, working from a childhood memory and a last name and a city, found her an older woman, now retired, living quiet, who answered the phone with the wariness of someone who had spent a career learning that most calls are bad ones. When Margaret said her name, the whole name, the untouched half of her face and the scarred half, both the line went silent for a long moment. Then Lena Marsh said, I have been waiting 21 years for this call, child, and I never let myself believe it would come." And she said she had kept everything. There was one more name, and this one Margaret did not have to reach for, because the name had been reaching for the story for 2 decades. Adrienne Webb had been a young investigative reporter when the fire happened, and she had smelled the wrongness of it the way a good reporter smells a covered grave, and she had chased it until the chasing cost her the job and nearly the career, until an editor with a nervous publisher told her the Holt Group was not a story worth her future. She had never closed the file. She had only put it in a drawer and gone on to smaller, safer things, and hated herself a little every year for doing it. When word reached her through the careful channels Adrienne had kept alive for exactly this, that the Holt heiress was alive and running, and had a story to tell, she did not hesitate. The drawer had been waiting a long time to open. For 2 days it almost felt like they were winning. They had the beginnings of proof, the promise of the original trust from Lena Marsh, the hunger of a reporter with an old debt, a place to sleep, walls between them and the guns. Margaret slept for 6 hours straight, for the first time in a week. Jamal fixed the little radio finally, and it woke up playing an old station out of the past, and Margaret laughed a short, surprised sound, as though laughter were a language she had studied once and forgotten she still knew. That was the night Malik sold them. Jamal never learned the exact number. He learned only that a man named Victor Kane had reached out through the same crooked channels Malik used for the things around the edges of the body shop, and that Kane paid in the kind of money that makes an old friendship look small and abstract by comparison. He learned it because he came up the back stairs near midnight with sandwiches and heard Malik's voice low on the phone through the thin door. Heard him say the address, heard him say both of them. "Yeah, upstairs, but you get here fast and you make it look like whatever you want. I don't want to see it." Jamal did not go through the door. He went back down, and he got Margaret, and they were out the side window and onto the fire escape when the cars came. 2 of them, fast and dark. Jamal got Margaret to the alley, and there was a man already there, because Kane's people were not amateurs and had thought about the alley, and what happened next was short and ugly and left Jamal with a cut over his eye and a stranger unconscious against a dumpster. But it left him with something else too, and this was the thing that mattered, though he did not know yet how much it would matter. In the struggle, the man's phone had come loose and skittered across the wet concrete, and Jamal, running on the animal arithmetic of a fight, had scooped it up out of pure instinct, the way you grab anything that might be worth something when you have nothing. It was still unlocked. In the seconds before he shoved it into his jacket and pulled Margaret into the dark, he saw a string of messages on the screen and a name at the top of them, and the name was Victor Kane, and the messages were about the 2 of them, an address, a price, and the words "no more mistakes" like the courthouse. He did not have time to read it all. He had time only to understand that he was holding in one bloody hand the thing that connected the man in the corridor to the guns in the street. Later that night, in the first safe hour they found, he did the one thing he knew to do with a machine opening its settings before the screen could lock, killing the auto lock, thumbing every message and every timestamp into photographs and mailing those photographs to an address only he and Lena Marsh could reach, so that even if the phone died in his pocket, the words would outlive it. Then he wrapped the thing in a plastic bag and kept it close. It was the only weapon they had that could not be shot back at them. They ran with nothing after that. Malik was gone to them, and the body shop, and the 2 rooms, and even the dead driver's car, which they abandoned 3 miles out and finished on foot and bus, and the kindness of a long-haul trucker who did not ask questions. They ended 2 nights later in a motel in New Jersey that rented rooms by the week to people who had reasons not to be found, a low strip of doors and a buzzing sign and a parking lot with more broken glass than cars. No money left worth counting, no allies, no name either of them could use, the bottom of it. The place the story goes when every door has closed. Margaret sat in the corner of the room, farthest from the window, wrapped in the motel's thin blanket, shaking not from cold. The single lamp threw hard shadows. Jamal sat on the edge of the bed with the cut over his eye stiffening and the bagged phone on the nightstand. And he looked at her. This woman he had married 9 days ago to save his daughter. This woman whose father wanted her dead so badly, he had spent 21 years being patient about it. And he understood something that rearranged him. He had spent the first days thinking of her scars as the wound. They were not the wound. They were the proof of survival. A little girl of 9 had been in a house that a powerful man wanted to burn, and the fire had taken her mother and her face. And it had not taken her, and she had grown up under the shadow of a threat no one would name, and she was still here, still upright, still shaking in a corner, but with her eyes lit from inside by something that would not go out. The marks on the left side of her face were not disfigurement. They were a medal pinned to her by fire for the crime of refusing to die on schedule. It was not her face that had ever been the monstrous thing in this story. The monstrous thing was the smooth, unmarked, respectable face of the man who had signed the order, the man whose skin was perfect and whose soul had burned down to the joists a long time ago. There is a kind of ruin that shows on the outside, and a kind that shows nowhere at all, and only one of them should frighten you. "We stop running," Jamal said. Margaret looked up from the corner. "We have nothing. We have the trust, or we will when Lena gets here. We have Adrienne and everything she never got to print. We have that." He nodded at the bag on the nightstand. Kane's own phone, his own words, an address and a price, and a man saying no more mistakes like the courthouse. "We have enough to prove the shell companies, the money moving in circles, the line that runs from a fire 21 years ago straight to your father's front door." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the lamp cutting his face into planes. "Running is what he needs us to do. A running man looks guilty. A running man dies tired in a motel, and everyone believes he had a reason to run. So we stop giving him that. We write a different ending. He'll deny everything. He'll say it's all fake. He has an army of lawyers, and I have a scarred face and a criminal husband, no offense. None taken. And you're right, if we dump everything at once, he buries it. Too much, too fast, easy to call a hoax." Something that was nearly a smile touched Jamal's mouth the first in a long time, and it was not a warm thing. It was the look of a man who has finally found the wrong sound and knows exactly which bolt to turn. "So we don't dump it. We bait him. We put out just enough to make him come into the light and say the things he thinks are safe to say. We make him stand up in front of the whole world and lie about the exact facts we can prove are true, and then we let him finish the sentence himself." He took the little radio, the one he had fixed, and set it beside the laptop Adrienne had gotten to them through a courier, and Margaret understood what he was asking. Not a full confession. Not the whole file. A single short video, her voice, and enough of the truth to draw blood released where it could not be ignored, aimed to force one response and one response only, that Peter Holt would have to stand at the coming shareholders' meeting and deny it in public on the record in front of every camera in the country. He would have to state out loud and definitively the very things that Lena Marsh's document and Kane's phone would prove were lies. He would build the trap with his own mouth. All they had to do was open the first door and let him walk through it the way he had made his own daughter walk through hers. Margaret came out of the corner. She sat down in front of the laptop's small dark eye, and for a moment the old instinct rose in her, the hand drifting up toward the side of her face, the reflex of 21 years of being looked at and looked away from. "You don't have to show it," Jamal said quietly. "Your voice is enough. Your name is enough." She lowered her hand. "No," she said. "He spent my whole life teaching me to hide this. Every mirror, every veil, every hat. He made me ashamed of the one thing that proves I survived what he did. I think it's time he saw it. I think it's time everyone did." They recorded it near dawn. She did not cover her face. She said only what they had decided she would say, the bait, and no more, that she was alive, that the fire that scarred her had been no accident, that her marriage had been arranged to serve a purpose no one would guess, and that she would be telling the rest of it soon, with proof to anyone who cared to listen. Her ruined face filled the small screen, steady, unhidden, and terrible in its calm. When it was done, Jamal sent it up into the world through the channels Adrian had built, and it caught the way a spark catches in a dry season, and by full light it was everywhere, and there was no calling it back. But a spark thrown into dry country burns in every direction, including yours. The same video that lit the fuse told every hunter in Victor Kane's employ that they were still alive, still together, still a problem, and roughly where a problem like that would hide. That last night, before the world changed, they did not sleep in the motel. They left it dark and undisturbed as a decoy and walked a mile through cold fields to an abandoned farmhouse Margaret had spotted from the road, and they spent the hours until dawn in a house with no floor in half its rooms and no glass in its windows, taking turns at the black squares where the windows had been listening to the country for the sound of engines. Twice cars slowed on the distant road. Twice they went on. Margaret sat against a wall in the cold with Jamal's jacket over her shoulders, and the bag with Kane's phone held against her chest like the last coal of a fire. And she watched the sky over the broken roofline go from black to gray to the first thin bloodline of morning. "If this works," she said very low, so low the words barely carried across the ruined room, "I don't know how to be a person who isn't afraid. I've never been one. I wouldn't know where to start." Jamal was at the window with his back to her, watching the road. "You start the way you fix anything," he said. "One piece at a time. You find the part that's broken and you don't look away from it no matter how bad it looks, and you put your hands on it and you begin." He turned then and looked at her across the dark, at the scarred face he had long since stopped seeing as scarred. "You've already started. You just showed your face to the whole world. Everything after that is easier." The light came up gray and then gold over the fields. Somewhere south of them, in a tower in Manhattan, a very rich man was reading the morning news and beginning to be afraid for the first time in 21 years, though he did not yet have the sense to call it that. He would learn the way the men like him always learn, that the strongest weapon a cornered person owns has never been a gun or money or a name. It is the truth spoken plainly by someone who has finally stopped being afraid and released at the one moment when the powerful cannot afford to stay silent. A scar on the skin can wound a person for a lifetime, but it is cowardice in the face of evil and not any fire that truly leaves a soul disfigured, and Margaret Holt had walked out of the flames with her courage, the one thing that never burned. They left the farmhouse as the sun cleared the trees, and they turned south toward the city, toward the tower, toward the man who had made them, walking now, not away from the guns, but straight into the room where the guns lived. The running was over. What came next, they would do on their feet in the light with the whole world watching. The Holt Group's emergency shareholders meeting convened in a glass tower in Manhattan 2 days after the video broke, and it drew the kind of crowd that gathers only when money is frightened. The main hall on the ground floor had been arranged for the occasion, rows of seats, a raised platform, a podium bearing the company's mark. Reporters lined the walls, their cameras already live, feeding the moment out to the whole world in real time. Security stood thick at every door, and at the center of it all, unhurried, immaculate, in a dark suit, stood Peter Holt, who had decided that the way to kill a story was to walk directly into the light and dare it to survive him. He was good. Jamal, watching from the crowd with a cap pulled low and the bagged phone heavy in his jacket, had to grant him that. Holt stood at the podium and spoke of grief of a troubled daughter, long estranged, of the tragedy of mental illness and the cruelty of the internet, and he did it with the calm of a man who had never once in his life been made to answer for anything. Beside him, half a step back, stood the broad-shouldered man from the courthouse corridor. Victor Kane wore his confidence like the expensive suit it matched. He believed, as his employer believed, that this was already over. And then Peter Holt made the mistakes that ambition makes when it has never learned fear. He got specific. Pressed by a reporter about the video's claim regarding a trust, he permitted himself a thin smile and said on the record, before every camera in the country, that the trust his late wife had established had long since lapsed, that it held no force and had held none for years, and that any suggestion he had arranged anything to circumvent it was the fantasy of a disturbed woman. Pressed again about the fire, he set his jaw and stated plainly that he had no involvement whatsoever in the accident that had taken his wife and scarred his child, and that he resented the question. He said these things because he believed them to be safe. He believed the original trust was ash and the fire long buried. He built the trap with his own mouth brick by brick, exactly as Jamal had said he would, and Victor Kane stood at his shoulder and let him because Kane believed it too. They had both cut on the bait. The disturbance began at the back of the hall. A ripple heads turning a security guard moving and then not moving, because the woman walking down the center aisle was doing so with such unhurried certainty that stopping her seemed for one crucial moment like the wrong thing to do. She wore no hat. She wore no veil. Margaret Holt walked into the light of 100 cameras with the scarred side of her face turned fully toward them, and she did not lift a hand to cover it. Behind her, a step back and to the side exactly where he had stood at a courthouse days before, came Jamal saying nothing, being a wall being the thing she could stand in front of. The hall went loud, and then as she reached the platform, strangely quiet. "My name is Margaret Holt," she said, and her voice carried without a microphone because the room had gone silent enough to let it. "My father has just told you that I am disturbed. He has told you that my mother's trust lapsed years ago. He has told you he had nothing to do with the fire that did this to my face." She lifted her scarred hand unhurried and let the cameras have it. "I would like to show you what a disturbed woman brought with her." She set a document on the podium beside her father's, and she asked Lena Marsh to come forward, and an older woman rose from a seat near the front, where she had been sitting unremarked the whole time, and took the platform with the steadiness of someone who had waited 21 years for the privilege. Lena Marsh did not make a speech. She identified the document in a clear, dry voice as the original trust instrument drafted by Margaret's mother, of which she had been the drafting attorney's assistant, and of which she had retained a certified copy, and she stated its operative terms plainly, that the trust remained in full force, that it had never lapsed, that it contained the exact provision governing marriage that Peter Holt had just told the world did not exist. The thing about a trap built from a man's own words is that he cannot unsay them. Peter Holt had 90 seconds earlier staked his name on the claim that the trust was dead. Now the living document sat on the podium beside him, certified witnessed real, and every camera in the room swung between his face and the page and back again. He had not been caught by an accusation. He had been caught in the gap between two facts, one of which he had supplied himself, and there is no lawyer alive who can argue a client out of a contradiction the client created on live television. "That's a forgery," Holt said, and his voice cracked on the second word, and the crack was louder than any shout. "It's certified," Lena Marsh said. "The originals are lodged where you cannot reach them. I made sure of that the week her mother died. I have been making sure of it ever since." Then Jamal stepped forward, and he set the last piece on the podium, and it was not a document. It was a phone in a clear plastic bag, and it was on, and it was Victor Kane's. "This came off one of your men in an alley days after you sent them," Jamal said, and he did not raise his voice because the room was doing the raising for him. "It's still got the messages on it. Everyone photographed and mailed off the same night in case you were wondering, so breaking the phone won't help you now. An address, a price, and a line I've been thinking about a lot." He looked up past Holt to the broad-shouldered man half a step behind him, whose confidence had drained out of his face like water out of a cracked glass. "It says no more mistakes like the courthouse. Now who do you suppose was writing that the night after two people got shot at coming down the steps of a wedding?" Every camera turned to Victor Kane. Kane did what men like Kane always do at the exact wrong moment. He ran. He broke for the side door, the one nearest the platform, moving fast for a big man, and he made it halfway there before the doors opened ahead of him instead of behind, and the people who came through them were not reporters. Adrienne Webb had made her calls the night before, the way a reporter who has kept a file for 21 years knows exactly which calls to make and to whom, and the federal agents she had brought to the building came through the side door in a line, and Victor Kane ran directly into the thing he had spent his career helping other men avoid. After that, it came apart quickly, the way a structure comes apart once the load-bearing lie is pulled out of it. Adrienne released the full file to every outlet at once, the shell companies and the circling money and the paper trail that ran from a fire 21 years old straight to the top of the tower, all of it timed to land, while the cameras were still live and the contradiction still fresh. Peter Holt was not let out in handcuffs that hour. Men like him rarely are, but the agents took Victor Kane that night, and Kane, faced with the whole of it and the certainty of where it ended, did the arithmetic of every lieutenant who discovers he has been left holding the weight alone, and began to talk. By the end of the week, the agents had what they needed for Holt, too. The dirty empire that had taken a lifetime to build came down in a matter of days, and the man who had traded his daughter for it was left with neither. Jamal and Margaret were cleared. It took time and lawyers and the tedious machinery of the law grinding true for once, but the story that had been written to convict them was undone by the very evidence they had gathered running for their lives, and the marriage that had been arranged as a murder weapon was examined and found, to the surprise of everyone but the two people inside it, to have quietly become something else entirely along the way. Jamal drove 3 states the following weekend to a modest house where a small girl had been waiting, and when Zoe came off the porch at a dead run, he went down on his knees on the walk to catch her, and he held on longer than a man usually holds a 5-year-old, long enough that she squirmed and asked if he was crying, and he said no, and he was, and that was allowed. No power on earth was going to divide them now. The thing he had signed away his freedom to protect was safe, and it had cost him more than he had bargained for and given him back more than he had dared to want. A year after the tower, Margaret and Jamal ran what remained of the Holt fortune together, though they had gutted it of its old purpose and rebuilt it around a new one. The Holt Foundation, they called it, still keeping the name, deliberately turning a word that had meant fear into a word that meant something else. And they pointed it at children who carried wounds that did not show, and young people whom poverty had backed into the same kind of corner Jamal had once been backed into. It was the work Margaret's mother, the careful attorney who had built a wall of law around one child she loved, might have chosen if she had lived, and Margaret knew it and did it partly for her. They lived in the Hudson Valley in a house that was quiet, in the way the estate had never been quiet, a quiet that held no listening, in it only peace. Zoe grew tall there. She had taken to Margaret from the first afternoon with the uncomplicated loyalty of a child who does not read, faces the way frightened adults do, who had looked at the scars, once asked what happened, been told the truth in a version her age could hold, and thereafter simply stopped noticing them, the way you stop noticing the color of a familiar wall. Somewhere in the first year, without ceremony, she began to call Margaret Mom, and the first time she did it, Margaret went very still, and then very quietly left the room, and Jamal let her go because some things a person needs to feel alone before they can bear to feel them in company. On an evening in early autumn, the 3 of them walked down to the river that ran below the house, the light going long and gold over the water, the way it does at the close of a good day. Zoe ran ahead to throw stones and count the skips. Margaret walked with her scarred hand in Jamal's unhidden in the open air, a thing that a year before she could not have imagined doing in daylight, and the marks the fire had left caught the low sun and did not look like ruin at all. They looked like what they were, the proof that she had survived, worn now without shame, in the last light of an ordinary and hard-won day. A real family, it turns out, is not made of shared blood, and it does not require a perfect beginning, and it certainly does not require that anyone start out loving anyone else. It is built slowly out of understanding and out of loyalty, and out of the single stubborn decision made over and over to not let go of one another when the storm comes and everything in the world is telling you to run. Jamal Rivers had made that decision in an oil-stained garage for a number written on a contract. He got to keep making it every day after for free by the river in the gold light, with the two people the whole ruinous bargain had somehow against all its own intentions given him.